Imagine a world without some of the biggest names in the car business. Well, I'm here to tell you that such a world almost existed. Hey guys, Stype here with a list of cars that saved their companies from being Thanos-ed. Let's go!
Number 7.
When the 2008 financial crisis hit, it hit hard. Many people lost jobs, couldn't buy cars, and the car business struggled. Ford killed Mercury, Chrysler killed Plymouth, and GM killed Pontiac and Hummer. Buick would have been dead too if it wasn't for the Regal. Launched the same year, this rebadged Opel insignia proved to be a success for many GM brands all over the world, but in China, where it sold as Buick, it was huge, a massive hit. So much so that not only did it keep the brand alive, but it made it very profitable too. But why? Well, Buicks are one of the earliest American cars exported to China, where they were always regarded as symbols of wealth and prestige. Even the emperor had one, so imagine how much everyone else wanted one too. Also in the 90s, GM partnered with SAIC, a Chinese manufacturer, to develop and locally build cars for the Chinese market, cars that carry the prestigious Buick name. So when the Regal was introduced, this well-priced, well-equipped, and well-designed car couldn't have been anything else but a success, even during the worldwide financial collapse. These days, Buick is going strong and offers 15 different models, 10 of which are exclusive to China. Patriots would say it's a sellout, but John Cena would say, it's just smart business.
Number 6.
Currently, Porsche is the most profitable brand in the VW group. So much so that if there's a chip shortage, the productions of Golf and Tiguan are stopped to ensure that there are enough semiconductors for Porsches. So it's hard to imagine that this goose that lays the golden eggs was struggling in the 80s. The front engine models kept it from bankruptcy once, but it wasn't enough. Sales were dropping and the Porsche was doing anything just to stay afloat, like building the RS2 and the E500 for Audi and Mercedes. They needed a messiah car and needed one fast. Oh yeah, that would do. An affordable roadster that draws inspiration from legendary models like the 356 Cabriolet and the 550 Spider is exactly what Porsche needed. The so-called Boxster, yeah, it's a stupid name, finally ended the struggle. Apart from being good at everything that Porsches always were, like performance, handling, and build quality, it was also a very profitable model. With the help of some former Toyota engineers, Porsche implemented the just-in-time method, which greatly improved productivity and lowered the cost. Moreover, many parts were shared with the 911, like the entire front end, and most of the M96 water-cooled engine. This all saved a lot of money that was later invested into developing Porsche's most successful model ever, the hideous Cayenne.
Number 5.
Guess how many times Aston Martin went bankrupt? 7 times. By far more than any other car company ever. And it would have been 8 if it wasn't for Ford, who saw potential in this struggling old-timey company and decided to buy it all up. The revival was simple. Forget about the bespoke but outdated Virage, Vantage, V8 models. What Aston Martin needs is a new car and built in a way that no other Aston was built before, out of pieces from other, cheaper cars. And so, some buttons and switches in the new DB7 came from the Ford Scorpion. The chassis and the straight-six engine were from Jaguar, which was also owned by Ford, and the taillights and the door handles came from Mazda, who at the time was in partnership with, you guessed it, Ford. There were even some Citroen parts, but who cares? It's not like an average Aston buyer will ever say, hey, I recognize those side mirrors. I have the same in my CX. What mattered was profit and the design, which was so good.
So good.
So good, in fact, that it influenced the design of all other Astons until today. And considering that the DB7 was an entry-level model and therefore surprisingly affordable, it was like that E-Type moment all over again. Cheaper, but prettier than any Ferrari. In the next 10 years, Aston managed to sell more than 7,000 DB7s, which may not seem like a lot, but that was over a third of all cars Aston sold in its entire history. I guess 7 really is a lucky number.
Number 4.
In the 60s, Honda was one of the biggest motorcycle makers in the world, but their car business, it wasn't doing so well. Their lineup consisted of a K-Truck, a K-Roadster, and a K-City car. And although these were cute and all, they weren't exactly selling like hotcakes. Get it? Hot cakes, but with a K because they were a K class. What they needed was something bigger, more powerful, something that could be sold outside of Japan, like the Honda 1300, except that wasn't it. Constant development changes and delays resulted in a higher price than expected, and worst of all, the 1300 didn't even make it to Europe and the United States. It was such a flop that Honda was thinking about shutting down the whole car division, but not before giving it one last try with the Civic. Learning from the mistakes of the overly ambitious 1300, Honda kept the Civic simple. Stretch chassis from the N600, a small water-cooled 4-cylinder, and an independent suspension. That's it, simple. And on the Japanese market, very successful. But the best was yet to come. 3 years after its introduction, the world was hit with the oil crisis. The demand for small, light, and frugal cars spiked overnight in the Civic, while that car was more fuel efficient than any other in the US. Needless to say, the buyers flocked to Honda showrooms faster than billionaires flocked to Epstein's Island. What I meant to say is it sold well and it saved Honda's car division.
Number 3.
This thing saved BMW. Yeah. Following World War II, most of Europe was financially crippled and not really a hotbed for luxury limos like the BMW 502. So Bavarians turned to a new market, the United States. Mercedes was doing well after enticing Americans with the 300 SL, so the same should work for BMW, right? It didn't. The 300 SL had a strong pedigree, being a road version of a successful racer, but the 507, that was just some expensive car. That little stunt left BMW with even more debt and an inch away from going under. The saving grace came in the form of a little Italian bubble car, the Isetta, which was so much more in tune with the depressing situation in Europe. It was cheap to buy and cheap to run. As for the safety, if the war didn't kill you, what else is there to be afraid of? Anyway, BMW acquired the license to produce their own Isetta, but first, them being Germans, they had to improve the original design to the point where no parts were interchangeable with the Italian version. It was a success. 160,000 sold means it was the best-selling single-cylinder car ever. And sure, you can mock it for being comically small, slow, and nerdy, but without it, the BMW brand would have been dead and forgotten. Also, none of these would have existed. So how about a thank you, Isetta?
Number 2.
Here we go again. In the 1973 oil crisis, blah, 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 death of insatiable American V8s, blah, 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 affordable Japanese competition, blah. All of this ravaged the big three, who quickly put together something cheap, frugal, and awful. Ford had the Pinto, GM had the Vega, and Chrysler came up with Horizon. And although they were selling well, for Chrysler, it just wasn't enough, and it continued bleeding money. Their last chance was hiring Lee Iacocca, one of the greatest visionaries in the car industry. His breakthrough idea, the one that secured Chrysler a big loan from the government, was the first ever modular platform, also known as the Chrysler K-platform. Derived from the L platform that underpinned the Omni and Horizon, it kept the front-wheel drive and the transverse engine, but it also could grow and shrink and have a variety of engines. The first batch of the K-cars were the Aries and Reliant, but stretch the platform and now you have the cars like the New Yorker or the Caravelle. Stretch it some more and you have the Voyager minivan, which started the whole revolution on its own. In the 9 years that this platform was used, nearly 50 cars had it under their body. Cars that shared many components, so the production cost was low, and that meant high profits. So high, in fact, that Chrysler repaid the $2 billion government loan ahead of time. Meanwhile, I have a friend that still owes me $100. It's been 7 years, Dave! I wonder if he watches my videos.
Number 1.
Before being owned by Volkswagen, Lamborghini was always a troublesome company, beginning with the first owner and the guy who started it, Ferruccio Lamborghini. Even he had given up and sold the majority of the shares after just 9 years. Since then, 6 different owners tried and failed to make it profitable. Hell, even Chrysler couldn't do it. I guess the K platform wasn't suitable for a V12 mid-engine supercar. Anyway, in 1997, just before VW stepped in, Lamborghini was doing so bad that it sold the least amount of cars in the past 30 years. But all that changed when the Germans took over. First, they introduced a new flagship model, the Murcielago, which, despite being the first Lambo that had the bolts tightened properly, was never going to be a big moneymaker. That role was waiting for a smaller and more affordable V10 Gallardo. In its first year alone, Lambo sold over 900 of them, an instant record. The next year was even better, but then came the Spider and the Performante and a whole lot of other additions. By the end of its 10 years of production life, over 14,000 Gallardos were sold, which is more than all other Lambos combined. And since then, the sales of the newer models are even better than that. I know this isn't said very often, but thank God for the Germans. And now, 3 more savior cars. Try and guess them. And